Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson. Hello and welcome to episode 108 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Helping food service operators to become more popular and profitable. Ken Burgin comes from a background as a cafe and restaurant operator in Sydney before starting the online management platform Profitable Hospitality. This led him to work for hospitality finance company SilverChef, where he now focuses on educational content and events. With many years of experience, Ken has seen all kinds of changes sweep the industry, from fickle fads to future foundations. It was a pleasure to have Ken on the program, and I'm certain you'll enjoy this one. Hello and welcome to the show, Ken. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm very excited. You've obviously had a very interesting background, moving from ops to now working with SilverChef, and we're going to get into that story, and it's a pleasure to have you on today.
James, great to be here. Really appreciate it. Love the work you're doing and nice to be part of it.
The first question that I like to ask on this program is an exceptional hospitality experience. So ultimately, what does that mean to you?
I love recognition. I think that feels really good. If someone, they don't need to know my name, but just nice to see you again, or you'd like to sit over here like the last time. It's pretty rare that someone remembers your coffee. Occasionally that might happen, but recognition I think is great.
And I mean, with recognition, is that something that you think is just endemic in hospitality? Is it an assumed component of the industry, or is it something that is going above and beyond in the service industry?
Well, I think it can be in retail and lots of service situations as well. I think it needs to be kind of genuine. Like if you check into a hotel and, they've got your name from last time. Hello, Mr. Burgin, nice to see you again. It's not like they're faking it, but that doesn't feel the same because you might be in another city, but it's just something that they actually genuinely remember your face. And interesting on that, I'm in my 60s and a lot of service staff are in their 20s or just something like that. And I remember hearing a friend of mine saying, over 30 you disappear. And it's an interesting one. I'm not kind of complaining, but I think it's an interesting challenge for operators to think about their young staff, how they relate to people older than themselves in their 60s. My God, that's a fossil. That's my grandparents or something like that. But yeah, I think that the warmth and the recognition has to be there, whatever age the customer is.
When you say that this person said that over 30 they disappear, is it purely down to staff? You're saying they're relating to the guest or the customer, or?
Yeah, relating to the guest, and like someone you go in regularly and they look at you and the same person serves you and you realise they don't even remember. It's just like a bit weird. So I don't think it's necessarily baked into an age group of not recognising, but I actually think it's a trainable skill as well. But an operator needs to recognise that if this is a weakness from some staff, and I think maybe it's to do with staff who are just a little bit totally involved with themselves, or they might be the people who are also got one eye on their mobile, which is beside the coffee machine. Yeah, it's something for an operator just to kind of be aware of, that there should be a lot of recognition, especially for places where you're serving the same people pretty regularly.
You mentioned technology in your answer there. Do you think that that's getting worse with technology, or do you think it's been the same and you're just observing it differently as you've gotten older?
No, I think it's the same. I think it's not the fault of mobile phones. I don't know about personality types, how that would relate to that. Possibly someone could explain that certain types who are more involved in themselves and their own network and not outward looking. I'm not sure what it is, but I think it's definitely something that a lot of people in the over 30s even, it's not even over 60s, they have a bit of a gripe about. And, it's a pretty tedious conversation. I think most times people complaining about millennials and all that, I don't have much time for that. But just coming back to the thing I love is recognition. If it's not happening, I think an operator should be aware of the kind of level of recognition that's happening. And it's not just the boss who everyone notices, because bosses are usually pretty good at that, but it should be across all the team.
So let's go back to more positive, and you mentioned there bringing it back to recognition. Obviously, once they've recognized this issue, how do they build on that and ensure that their staff, and so I want to broaden this to service-related businesses, and ultimately every business is a service business.
Yes, and let's think about it. It's to do with empty coffee cups. It's to do with dirty tables. It's to do with someone who's been sitting there for 5 minutes and you haven't taken their order. It's noticing a skill. So here's an example I like to think of. I don't know if you bought a car originally, but I remember a few years ago I bought a Renault. Okay, not a usual car. Suddenly, what did I notice everywhere? Oh my God, silver Renaults, just the same model as mine, or different colours, but there's Renaults everywhere. And I think it's called your reticular activating system, RAS. It's kind of noticing things, and there were no more Renaults. It's just that I was noticing them. And if you find that people are not noticing that, those people have been sitting on an empty coffee cup and it's their first coffee. See, I'm the sort of person who will always have a second coffee. Usually if you ask me, yeah, I will. But I won't sort of reach out necessarily for it. And selling the second coffee is a pretty important profit driver for some places. So if you recognise there's this problem of noticing things, we need to do some training around that. And it might be, okay, today let's notice how many female customers compared to how many male customers. Let's actually count. I want everyone to count, right? And then at the end of the day, we're going to compare numbers and whatever. Wow, isn't that interesting? It's like where 62 out of 100 were male and 38 were female. Gee, I thought it was the other way. Like noticing, or today we're going to notice everyone who's got a brown jumper or everyone who's got a child with them or something. You make a bit of a game out of it, but you're actually getting people noticing things outside their usual very limited range of what they notice.
I think that's a very powerful thing that is understated there in that, because what you're doing is training people to be identifying those things that do sit behind a lot of those demographic trends. That's a very powerful thing that you're training with that. So thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, and look, 50-year-old wait staff are just as negligent as this as well. Everyone has scotoma, is it? Blind spots. We all have them. We just, oh, wow, I didn't realise. I never saw that person. It's true, I didn't, but I should have. But if my noticing is sharper.
I mean, we're all guilty of that at times as well. And there are many cognitive biases that will limit our ability to see lots of these things. We can't physically see everything all the time. Otherwise, there'd be this flood of information.
Yeah, you'd be overwhelmed, wouldn't you?
So our brains do these things to stop us from being overwhelmed. And so we have biases. So that's a really interesting way to be honing in on that. I want to step into another question that I normally ask early on in the episode. And this is going to guide us into the rest of the show, which, as you know, I'm excited to move into. Ken, why do you do what you do? Ultimately, why do you get up in the morning and love hospitality? What is it that really inspires you?
Good question. Okay, so for me, hospitality has been a bit of a playground for the last 30-odd years where I can be creative, make good money, do a lot of experiment with a lot of things. There's lots of people activity around. Even when I say people activity, I think, oh, hang on, aren't you a bit of an introvert, Ken? Yes, at times I am, but other times I'm not. But yeah, I mean, going back in history, when I started my first cafe, I bought a cafe in Glebe in Sydney in a suburb, and I'd sort of always had that little kind of wish to have my own cafe, my own business. And then in a suburb where I was living, it was like I heard this business was for sale, and whoa, okay, how do you buy a business? What is a business? It was just like, because I'd been working in something completely different before that as a social worker in child welfare, totally different. Really enjoyed that, but I was getting a stage where I wanted to do something different and found out this business was for sale. I then heard another one was for sale, tried to buy the other one, didn't get it, and then this one, and just kind of pursued that and bought a business and started to make lots of mistakes like you do with your first, but also was doing enough things that were the right things to be doing pretty well. And, I was making enough money to cover up the mistakes I was making, which is pretty important. Everyone makes mistakes, but just so long as you're doing good things, they're more than the bad ones. Yeah, so I really enjoyed the whole kind of world of hospitality, the busyness, the buzziness of it, the creative opportunities, and having your own business. You just do what you damn well want to. And sure, you make mistakes. Hopefully you don't repeat them too many times. But I just loved the opportunity for sort of marketing and creative, redoing menus and everything. And I was learning while this was happening how to manage people as well, which I'd never done before. And I think most people who go into business have never really done it. They probably watched other people do it. Or maybe they've been lucky in a family business to watch their parents manage people. I didn't have that situation. So I had to be learning myself. And boy, you make a lot of mistakes. But again, don't repeat the mistakes. Just only make them once, hopefully.
And in that, a lot of people, they read books, they watch other people, they listen to podcasts, they watch movies, documentaries, and learn from other people's mistakes.
Yes, I was very hungry for knowledge about how to do it. Now, in the olden days, like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, there's lots of business books around. There still are. But if I went to a bookshop, I'd go straight to the business bookshelf and I would buy all sorts of things because this is kind of pre-YouTube and pre-podcast, actually. But I was really hungry. I'd go and hear speakers. I remember actually seeing Michael Gerber, the E-Myth guy, when he came to Australia. I was going and see sales trainers. And oftentimes they weren't actually people who were hospitality gurus, because that didn't really happen in Australia much. There occasionally someone would come out. I remember back in 1986, way back, I went to the US first time because I wanted to go to the restaurant show in Chicago. I'd heard it was amazing. And first trip to the US via Hawaii, land in Chicago was mind-blowing, and it's like everything about your first trip to the US is like that. But I just was learning so much and watching. And you have to be careful about drawing lessons from US experience because everything is so very different, but there's so much to learn as well. So I guess I was hungry for knowledge and I was ready to travel to get it as well.
Without interrupting the rest of your story, just along the way, what are some of those things that you learned from your first trip to the US that then you carried with you, that you brought back?
Well, one of the things that I really discovered then was the whole thing about menu science and menu design, because at that show they have amazing presentations. There's presentations the whole time, really high quality ones with great speakers. And I went to hear people talk about the old 4 quadrants of the menu design, and I thought, this is amazing. Oh my God. So I wanted to pursue that. And then this guy was selling videos of waiter training, selling skills and selling scripts. Now, the way US wait staff sell in the US is, very different. But even if we use 10% of that in Australia, we do a lot better the job than we do. So the fact that you could train people and there's training materials. I bought the videos, of course, and came back and they weren't compatible in Australia, but I fixed that up in due course. I think one of the things I saw was, you can be actually scientific about improving your business. You've got to be smart, of course, but it's not just about working harder and harder or, finding a brilliant chef or something like that. You can actually apply science. Another thing was someone just talking about profit margins and analysing a profit and loss statement and all that kind of stuff. And the money was kind of gushing in pretty well in those days. And I wasn't really focusing on that detail. So when I came back, it was like, okay, let's get the bookwork really organised and let's start to analyse and percentages, because they told me things like what food costs should be and wage costs should be and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I was kind of waking up in a really nice way.
Yes. So to continue on your story, obviously you went to the US. Obviously you sold your business eventually and...
Yeah, so I had a cafe for 10 years in Sydney and I had a consultant who worked with me, a really brilliant guy who I enjoyed. He gave me a lot of guidance. So that sort of mentoring was very, very powerful for me and in a sort of challenging way. Bought another business during that time. So I had the classic second business and didn't find that at all easy on the partnership side and just kind of like running 2 businesses at once, which were both very different. That was a bit of a mistake. Bought a takeaway business as well during that time. Again, what is it about the fact that if we're doing really well, we got to buy another one? Something wide in, because it often is not a good idea, especially if you're just a sole operator. And I was, I didn't have any business partner. And I found the whole idea of business partnership really difficult. And I always say to people, don't do it.
Why is that? Can you flesh that out just a little bit more? You don't have to talk about your specific situation, but...
Because when you go in, you have ideas about sharing responsibility and sharing decisions. But the moment it starts, everything is kind of different to what you expected. It needs more time or maybe needs more capital, or your family situation might change unexpectedly, all sorts of things. And me and my partner, we were both people who'd always just made our own decisions, never consulted with anyone. And suddenly we had to be 100% decision with another person. And that was really difficult for both of us. and unpleasant. Now, sometimes I see people who've got a business partner and, they split up who has a month off and this, that, and the other. And I love that. I really admire that. But I think it's actually pretty rare. I think most partnerships, there's a level of dissatisfaction there. It's not 1 and 1 plus 3 as they think it might be.
There ultimately needs to be someone who decides, because there can be conflict. And
I think you can set those structures up with a partnership agreement, but by the time we realised that was necessary, it was too far gone with our kind of level of disagreement and our emotional relationship. Both of us had other businesses, so where we were in partnership, we just decided to sell it, which was good. And we didn't really make much money on that, but we learned a lot.
And obviously your focus and time and attention's diverted as well, and then there could be contention. But Ken, I want to just quickly double back to where you said you don't recommend getting a second business, especially if you're a sole operator. This can obviously be applied across any industry as well, not just hospitality retail. In what cases would you recommend someone should expand, get a second business? Is it when there are, and to use an overused word, when there are synergistic benefits, or is there some sort of economies of scale that you should be looking for first? What do you recommend?
If you've got systems that you can actually duplicate a business, apply the same systems, and you can draw back to being like a general manager role, things like I had a little promise to myself. I didn't clear tables and clear dirty plates, and I hardly ever did, because I wanted to be more the host or just at home. Oftentimes I'd be at home and the business was working. But if you're going to do a second one, you want to be able to be really kind of floating between the two and kind of tweaking the two and checking the KPIs of both to see which one's working better, and looking at it really as like two machines that you're kind of keeping them finely tuned and operating well. And that wasn't the case for me. But I think that can happen. Occasionally I talk to people and you can see that's how they're doing it. I admire it a lot. I think there's more technology now to enable that. You can watch both businesses from your phone, watch the numbers, watch the sales today, check the cameras to see what's happening in there. There's a lot more control. That control was always there. You had to do it with spreadsheets or, pen and paper or something like that. But it's certainly a lot easier for that now.
And now a lot of the work you do is using those numbers with other businesses. So how did you then go from that and that business experience to then eventually move into what you do now?
Yeah, so sold one business first and then the second one. And I'd always had the idea of being a consultant. I thought that would be a pretty cool thing to do, help people run their businesses better. And that was sort of interesting to do that. So I had money. I could just take my time to build that up, and didn't find that really super satisfying, because I think, I look at different people going into consultancy now, and a lot of it is about relationships. I think the consultants who work better, they really work on that relationship with the person they're consulting to, the operator. I didn't realise that, or maybe I just didn't want to do that. And the irony is with small business consulting, a cafe or a bar or a single restaurant, when they actually put their hand up for help, usually they can't afford you. You've got an idea of how many $100 an hour a day or something, and they can't. They freak out at that. So, yeah, it was not so exciting. But what I did start to do is I'd always had a lot of systems in my business, like job descriptions and, opening checklists and closing and all that kind of stuff. So I put those together and started to sell them. And you know what? The first ones I used to sell, they were on floppy disks. I don't know if anyone remembers floppy disks, but
I think people just recognize them as the save icon now.
Yeah. So I started doing that. And the other thing I started doing, which I loved, was running training sessions for the Restaurant Association. So I invented a couple of courses. One was called Management Boot Camp, which was 2 days of just a whole conglomeration of crisis management, staff management, all sorts of things. And the one that was a real winner was just called Cost Control, because the first thing, if money's tight, the first thing people think about is cut, save costs. Where am I spending too much, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd look at a whole lot of different ways people could do that. And I actually would show them a Michael Gerber E-Myth video, which is about half an hour. I'd stop every 10 minutes, we'd talk about it. And I found that tremendously powerful as a sort of framework for people, because I don't know what you're paying for chicken or for eggs or something like that. I certainly wasn't going to give people advice about where to save 20 cents a kilo cow and chicken, but I could give them a framework about running the old work on your business, not in your business, stuff that I wish I'd sort of discovered 10 years before. So that training side of my business was then called Profitable Hospitality. And then I was starting to sell systems, first on floppy disks. The orders came through on a fax machine, can you believe it? Going back in history here. And then on CD-ROM, and people bought them online, and we'd go to trade shows and sell them, and it was tremendous business. It was really good. And in some ways we were pioneering things there, selling, I'd say, in 10 minutes you can have job descriptions and a job contract for the chef you're going to interview for, and a set of good questions to ask her. So that was exciting to be able to do that, and then turned that into a membership site, Profitable Hospitality, which really flourished, really enjoyed that. So it was kind of tapping into a side of me too. I just loved helping people do business smarter. I was still doing training courses, a lot of training, had a membership site people could pay, and then there was a lot of information they could download, all the stuff I used to sell on CDs, lots of how-to stuff. Yeah, so kind of like underneath all this, I guess there's a sort of thing about being of service to people as well. And people will pay for good service, quality service, genuine service.
And obviously you've taken that from hospitality as well. That background in hospitality would have allowed you to not just see, but be able to deliver on that level of service.
Yeah, well, I think part of being successful, those things too, is understanding who your tribe is, who you're talking to, whether in a room with training or whether they're people who might be looking at your website wondering if they're going to pay to join. Just understand what that mentality is. And I think you and I would be the same. Over the years, we kind of learn who that hospo person is, what makes them tick. They'll pull their wallet out and spend on very high ticket items if they see the value, but they won't spend a cent unless they're convinced of that.
And you're able to identify demographics. Being in the service sector, you churn through numbers and numbers of people, huge volumes. You kind of develop your own archetypes of other customers, and you become very good at identifying groups of people.
It's amazing. You think about like even just a waiter or bar person or something like that. In the course of a year, they meet thousands of people. Incredible. Now, they may just kind of see them all as people and just pour the coffee and get out of my sight. But if we kind of help people see, wow, you're actually becoming a really skilled amateur psychologist with all the insights you're getting from people. So, whether it's at the service level or for me, it was more with the operator, the business owner level, just understanding what makes them tick. And, even like running a workshop, if you've got a full day, you absolutely want everyone to come back after lunch. And I was pretty good at that. But, if you find people don't come back after lunch or after morning tea, wow, I've got to check out what's going on here, because these people, they paid money, time's precious for them.
Before we continue with your story, without going on a detour, what are consultants doing wrong now? You've obviously gone through that experience yourself, and we'll see so many consultants coming in. They've been experienced in hospitality. We can apply this to other people who are giving advice in their particular field within their domain. What are consultants doing wrong now, and how can they improve their service?
Yeah, says someone who never feels he cracked the system, but I really know that there's tremendous benefit in having consultancy. I actually think that for hospo people who are not like big corporates who happily write a check for $50,000 for 6 months consulting, I think the model now is a combination of going in one-on-one and redoing the menu and finding a good chef and all that sort of thing, but also providing a kind of a small forum or a sort of shared, might be a private Facebook group. That's a very good way to do it, or something like that, where people can actually talk with colleagues and share ideas, because people want to hear from you, the expert, but actually sometimes I more want to hear from someone else who's gone through something similar to me and they cracked the problem, whereas I'm still floundering with it. And I'm watching, a few consultants like that, the ones who do a kind of combination of group and one-on-one thing is, I saw a statement that someone was talking about with mentoring, mentoring, consulting. It's kind of, there's differences, but this guy was saying, when we do mentoring, you're going to have to carry the bags, meaning if we've got to kind of sort out your bookwork because that's a mess, you're going to have to do that. I'm not doing that for you. Some people might say, actually, well, that's what I want done. Okay, well, I'm not the right person for you. And I think maybe that's something I didn't quite crack is, getting people to carry the bags.
Interesting analogy there, though, to carry the bags. What you're describing is to just draw a very clear line with the service that you provide. And anyone can apply that in their business as well. I mean, they might be looking at adjacent activities that they can be doing and taking them on, and they might be getting sidetracked from their core business. So
yeah, I remember hearing a retail consultant. He used to work with all sorts of shops, and he said the number one thing that people want to hear, they want the cash register to be ringing more often straight after you start working with them. And that's pretty important too. So yes, we need to get the food costs down and the roster's expensive, but what can we do this week to get more sales happening and in a way that they'd attribute that back to you? So that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, people want the 80-20. They want the 20% effort for the 80% result. And it's very myopic, but people do think like that. And there's a lot of work that's involved to actually truly improve things. And I'd like to move on though, because I think we could sit on this one for a little while and I don't want to take the episode on a negative road. So tell us more about how you went from consulting to working with SilverChef.
Sure. So I had built profitable hospitality up into quite a robust business. You know, it was a membership side. We had people paid monthly or annual fees. I was still doing quite a bit of training. I was doing webinars, you know, online, a whole lot of stuff. I think good businesses, you know, they've got multiple streams of income. As bars and restaurants are realizing in the last few months, we need to have that as well. You know, more legs on the table means it's stable. So I'd built that up into quite a good business. And then I was approached. So SilverChef is Australia's largest finance company for hospitality equipment. And we're in Australia, New Zealand and Canada, headquarters in Brisbane. And I was just vaguely aware of them. Anyway, they approached me and said, we'd like to buy your business and we want you to come with it, because they were passionately committed to helping their customers be more successful. And it's like, oh, wow, really? Oh, my God. Because I'd never thought of selling my business. I was just happily pottering along. I had, you know, new plans for a relaunch of a new part of it and redo the website, all those things.
And you'd gone through the process of selling your business before as well.
Yeah, so I'd sold a cafe and a restaurant, yeah.
Sorry, Ken, I'd love to hear the rest of your story as well, but I've got a question on that. What did you then do differently this time when you sold your business versus the previous times? They were under very different circumstances, but what did you do differently?
Yeah, okay. So the first time round selling two businesses, I had brokers. I highly recommend people use a broker to sell a cafe or a bar or anything like that. You've got to have a champion who sorts out the tie kickers, a hunter, you know, a real sales professional, which I never was. So that was one difference. Businesses sell on a multiple of profit. So you've got to be able to demonstrate profit. Occasionally they sell on emotion, you know, because it's got ocean views or something, but usually it's sold on profit. So I had good figures. And when it came down to selling this profitable hospitality, you know, I always track my numbers very carefully. Being a big company, they wanted to do due diligence, as they should, and I could answer all their questions. That was pretty important. And that's a lesson for every operator. You're actually ready. If someone approached you out of the blue, you could ring the bookkeeper and say, can you give me my latest P&L or something like that? And you could have good figures to them by tomorrow almost. And they'll have more questions and this, that, and the other, but be ready to jump anytime. And I hadn't been planning to jump, but when I needed to, I was able to do that.
Do those questions that you're looking to answer or have the answers at least close by, do they change based on the acquisition and what that company that's looking to acquire you, they're looking for, the data they're looking for, or are there some standard figures?
They're looking at brightness of the future, whether it's, you know, an online business or a bar or a cafe or whatever. So for our cafe and restaurant operators, what I didn't need to have was a lease. My lease was just, you know, my software licenses and things like that. Whereas, you know, if you're selling a cafe, how long is your lease and is it going to be renewed and something like that? Because whatever you paid $100,000, $200,000 for it, that's got to be paid off over the course of that remaining 5 years of the lease or something. So that's a difference. But both of them need standard operating systems. If you need staff, like I had a part-time virtual assistant. She was in the Philippines. She used to do a lot of the kind of just the routine admin work, whereas the cafe's got waiters and waitresses and a cook. You've got to have those systems of managing people pretty well set up.
Yes. Thanks for going down that tangent with me, Ken. But back to SilverChef has approached you to acquire profitable hospitality. What happened from there?
So we went through, it took a few months just with legal things, and they came back with a few questions. And what I did, one of my brothers is a real wizard with doing this sort of stuff. We put together I thought, a very, very good explanation of what the business is, much more than probably they were expecting. It's like detailed analysis of history and numbers and site traffic and all sorts of stuff like that. And thinking about, the bean counters who are going to be looking at this, and just the same as if you're selling a cafe, there's going to be, with the brother-in-law who's an accountant or your actual accountant, there's going to be people who are always looking at the glass half empty. You got to satisfy them too. So have good numbers, verifiable, there's no smells except nice ones. And so we moved ahead, and the idea was that I went to work with SilverChef because they wanted to develop profitable hospitality into different ways, and they wanted me to be on board. So I hadn't had a real job for decades. Like, really? You're going to pay me every week? Oh my God, holiday pay? Really? I mean, that was all understood. And I'm in Sydney, I was still working from my home office and going up there every couple of weeks. So that started. I have to say it didn't work out quite the way I'd hoped it would for a few reasons, with some changes in SilverChef and whatever. So I still had a job, but Profitable Hospitality was relaunched and didn't get the traction that they'd hoped it did. But I still found lots to do, and I'm still working with SilverChef. It's more than 4 years now. Their passion for helping their customers be more successful in business remained the same. Profitable Hospitality is not open as a separate site anymore, but I've actually got even more to do now. And boy, the last 3 or 4 months, I tell you, like everyone, everything's changed. I actually find it tremendously exciting finding ways to help people now in this, dire time of need. It's just incredible what's happening now, and just drawing on, the experience and skills I guess I've built up, and finding new ways to deliver and share information, get people help supporting each other. Yeah, it's exciting.
Thanks for bringing us up to speed on where you are now. To broaden that, and I want to take this further than you mentioned just the last 3 or 4 months. I mean, more generally, looking at the future, what are you learning about or exploring at the moment to prepare yourself for what's to come?
So I think one of the things I feel very excited about is I'm part of a few very, very good Facebook groups. And I guess, James, you might be part of some too. You may even run some, where people who are operators share ideas openly and honestly and provide resources and give feedback to each other. And I find this is a sort of new model. It's not consulting, it's not quite mentoring, and it's got to be run carefully, no bad behaviour, no abuse, no silly business. I'm finding those are tremendously supportive for people. For instance, Mother's Day was coming up beginning of May, and a month ahead of that, I thought, okay, Mother's Day is always the biggest single day of the year because Christmas is big, but it's not one day.
This is for cafes, just to frame that for listeners.
Yeah, for restaurants and cafes. Yeah. So through these groups, I started promoting, like, what are you going to do to make it this year the biggest month, even though you're closed? You can only do takeaway. So I like to take a bit of a lead with those things, not that they're my groups. And some fantastic discussions were happening. And, some people are just thinking, oh, yeah, we better do something. Then someone else has amazing ideas. And then you find someone who's doing incredible. They've done a new online ordering site and they're selling $99 high tea for mum lunches and all this kind of crazy stuff, and just sharing ideas. And lots of people, they did really, really well and surprised themselves. One of the things I'm talking about is just that this peer support is possible in ways now, which I think is tremendously valuable and, really useful.
Thank you for sharing your observations there. How are you, I guess, planning on using that moving forward? And are there some other resources that you're absorbing, or is it a matter of just putting your ear to the ground?
Yeah, okay. I'm a bit of a glutton for information. I have hundreds of blogs on my blog list. They don't post every day, fortunately. I follow, a lot of relevant Twitter streams, a lot of newsletters. I'm always looking for smart, and I like to share that stuff. And I actually got my own blog, kenburgin.com.au, and I recently started a newsletter as well called Hospo Reset, which is just sharing the best things I find each week. I see it as a curator role where, sharing the best of the best that I find. Really, even though that's just kind of like my side hustle, that's not related to my main job. But in my main job, I'm now the principal blogger for SilverChef, and really satisfying to do, detailed kind of how-to articles to share on our website. Very satisfying. Like, for instance, one I did when you couldn't seat people, you had to sell everything takeaway. Which app am I going to use? How do I use apps? Oh my God, what about my staff? Can they drive? Is there any legal issues about my staff driving? All that. So I've been putting a lot of explanatory resources together for that, running webinars on those topics. Suddenly, everyone was meant to negotiate with landlords. How do I negotiate it with a landlord? Oh my God, can I do it myself? We had several webinars on that with lawyers explaining all that. I love being able to empower people by giving them information and shortcuts and where to find stuff. And even with the landlord thing, and you're saying to me, listen, you absolutely got to get a lawyer helping you. This is complicated stuff. Spend a few $100s on a lawyer, you'll save tens of thousands of dollars. It's not the time for DIY. Anyway, that's just an example of the kind of stuff that really gets me excited, as you could tell.
I'd love to know, Ken, what do you believe requires more attention in your field, your domain, the system you operate within?
Okay, so I think this is a chance. The words reset, relaunch, rebuild, etc., being thrown around a lot. It's not going back to the old ways. People actually have to start to think about, what am I going to stop doing? I mean, there are people who were stopped from doing table service and pivoted to doing much more takeaway. They're actually making more money than they made before. Are they going to still do table service again? Yeah, probably, but they're not going to lose that lesson. So, I won't say fat and lazy. I don't think people got too fat on the profits from their small businesses, but there was a lot of inertia. And so what I'm trying to get people to think of is, you can't go back to not watching the numbers. You can't go back to old ways of rostering where you actually didn't know until next week how much this week's wages were. You've got to know hour by hour what that sort of thing is. There's no employing people, keeping them on because you feel sorry for them, even though they're a bit toxic and hopelessly inefficient, that sort of thing. Again, you can't tell people what to do, but you can give them maybe a little more confidence to make some hard decisions. People have got to make very tough decisions. It's going to be a brutal couple of years. People are poor. 500,000 people lost their jobs. There's JobKeeper and things like that. But boy, it's going to be so tough. And anything I can do to help people toughen up, make the tough calls. Sometimes that might mean, we're not going to reopen the business. But, it comes back to, I want people to have independence and freedom and lots of choices, and whether that's running a business or not.
And on the specifics of that, where we're covering those effects on the hospitality, events and tourism industry on another one of our programs called Quarantini. So listeners, if you're interested in that, there's more information on that over there, a little bit more around the retail and service end and the people who've been impacted the most. But Ken, the next question I'd like to ask you is, what is your biggest challenge right now? What are you grappling with at the moment?
Yeah, I'm not very good at time management, actually. I'm a little bit of a one to, it's not like a big problem because there's lots of, shiny butterflies around. But I think it's a bit of a challenge for me, prioritising things, seeing things right through to the end, yeah.
Yeah, specifically, what is it with that? Because time management is very broad. Is there something specific there? You mentioned about shiny butterflies, because this is common for a lot of creative minds, is they want to just be doing the next and most exciting thing. Is that the problem that you grapple with, that you're just always wanting to chase something exciting, or is there something else?
Yeah, there's the challenge of being an employee versus being an entrepreneur, because my whole life pretty much, I've just been self-employed and an entrepreneur. So I really like the job I'm doing. I like the opportunity to contribute in there. And now I'm able to do some more side things like the newsletter and the blog and things like that. That's good. But yeah, that's just a little bit of a challenge. Sometimes I want people to move faster and I got to take them with me. And oh my God, you look around and they're still way back there and I've streaked off and they actually don't know what I'm talking about.
Just the bureaucracy of larger businesses. I understand that.
Yeah.
Ken, what does your end game look like? What is it that you're aiming towards building as your legacy?
Yeah, well, I just want our industry to have more people making good money and not feeling frustrated by it, because I actually don't think that when it's an industry like that, we have a lot of bad service and high turnover and people who don't have proper career opportunities because businesses aren't very good at employing them and things like that. I would just love a healthier, more profitable hospitality industry, whether that's, my sector is food and beverage, whether it's broader in tourism and accommodation as well. But I just think generating your own income from what you do is always very exciting. That the kind of the science of how to run a business, whatever it is, I think is exciting. So I love to share as much of that as possible, help more people be prosperous and independent and being able to afford a holiday to the US rather than a holiday to the South Coast.
Yes.
Make lots of money. It's not all there is, but boy, when you haven't got it, it's not very happy.
That's totally fair. Before I ask my final question for you, Ken, in your answer there you said about the science of running a business. Are there a couple of metrics that you think businesses should be focusing on more that are often thrown by the wayside?
Yeah, well, one is don't sign a lease that's going to be too expensive, whether it's a bar or a cafe. I mean, if you've got rent that's going to be more than 7 or 8% of your turnover, it's just going to be too hard because you're aiming for 20% profit margin if you can, and most places don't do nearly that much. So that's one. And then the two key ones are your wage costs each week and an accurate measure of your food and beverage costs. People often mix those two up. Beverages, whether it's spirits or coffee or something, much more profitable than food. People throw the whole thing together into just one cost of goods and they don't realise that their food costs are too high. So I really love to get the point of sale figures and the profit and loss and just pull it apart and see what are the things that are making really great money. And if everything's clumped together, sometimes it disguises things that are losing money or just making very little money. Once people can see that in front of them, the decisions are pretty easy about, we're going to stop staying open till 5 o'clock, we're going to close at 3:30, or we're going to stop using that chicken supplier or something like that. I love numbers, and a lot of people in hospitality that don't dislike numbers. They're just not very good at it. They don't know how to use a calculator, even though they got one on their phone. And that comes back to the training that I've done. I love to be able to get people looking at our weekly sales and costs, a simple spreadsheet, and getting that aha moment. They, oh, really? Okay, that's how, instead of this blur from the point of sale system or crazy bookkeeping, it's just like, because numbers is power, but we got to understand them.
Ken, I have one last question for you today. That's who would you like to hear on the show?
Interesting. Okay. So I would love to hear a guy called Bob Phibbs, and he's called the Retail Doctor. So again, he's got quite a solid hospitality background. He's got a podcast. He's a guy in America. When I had a podcast, I interviewed him once. Tremendous thinker. I love his thinking because I think we can learn a lot from retail, even though we're in hospitality. I think he's a fantastic guy. And I'd love to hear his take.
Beautiful. And obviously broadly applied across any industry. Anyone who sells anything can learn from service industries. So
absolutely, yeah.
I'll get in touch with Rob. Thank you very much, Ken, for joining me on the program today.
Terrific. Really enjoyed it, James. Thanks. Great job you're doing.
This program is hosted by James Henderson with technical production by Jake Olver. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, led by Stephanie Holland, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.